Mitch B. Goldberg is a double demon, earning his BA in history in 1996 and his JD in 1999. He's the administrative partner of the Chicago law firm Lawrence Kamen LLC, where he actively practices in the firm's litigation and regulatory practice groups. Apart from his legal practice, Mitch is active in numerous bar associations, charitable organizations, and serves as a member of the Cook County Sheriff's Tolerance Council. He's also a frequent volunteer at Depaul, including serving as a volunteer mentor and chair of the LANS Dean's Advisory Board. And he's participated in several initiatives to benefit students and the broader Chicago community. So without further ado, Mitch, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very, very much. I offer my sincerest welcome to everybody, and I offer my thanks to everyone who made this evening possible, as well as all of tonight's panelists. Serving as chair of Depaul LAS Dean's Advisory Board is one of the most meaningful hats that I wear. I get a charge of collaborating with the dedicated Dean of LAS and the equally dedicated leaders, staff, and faculty of LAS to help serve the Depaul community. And I love to engage with my fellow Depaul alumni because it tends to remind me why I chose Depaul for my own education. I'm a proud double demon. And speaking as a nice Jewish boy from Skokie, Illinois, I found my education at Depaul University to be very, very meaningful. Because Depaul's and LAS's mission has always been about resilience and meeting the moment. It has always been about supporting the development of students as people and as agents of transformation. Depaul attracts students who want to make a difference in the world around them. It's one of the reasons I chose Depaul for my education, and its alumni include some pretty remarkable people who continue to work for positive change on a daily basis. It's what I like to call a Depaul thing. And I'm grateful for all of you joining tonight because your continued commitment to Depaul and to attending alumni events shows that you too are examples of a Depaul thing. Tonight, we get to hear from some people who live the Depaul thing, especially during these unprecedented times. Tonight, I get the privilege of introducing one of the hardest working people I know, Dean Guillermo Vásquez de Velasco, who is the Dean of LAS and a professor in the art school at Depaul. He has led the LAS community in meeting this moment during the entire pandemic. His career combines professional practice in architecture and planning with teaching, scholarship, and academic administration to celebrate design, multidisciplinary collaboration, and innovation in education. He is a passionate advocate for the importance of liberal arts in the 21st century and its key function in the education of future leaders. He came to Depaul 5 years ago and has been recently reappointed for a second term as Dean of LAS. So without further ado, I present Dean Guillermo Vásquez de Velasco.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you for such a kind introduction. And greetings to all our alumni and friends out there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I cannot wait for the next time when we will hopefully be all together, holding a glass in our hands and enjoying each other's company. This has been a challenging year for everyone. But as you will hear from our speakers this evening and later read in our Insights newsletter, LAS is resilient and it's ready. Our faculty have done an amazing job teaching online. Not an easy thing to do, but they have been so good at doing so that I expect that many of them will continue to do so into the future. Our staff has exceeded our expectations, assisting our students, amazing handholding, supporting our faculty, and managing all the operations of a very complex institution. Our students have continued to respond to our call to be intellectually curious and actively engaged in every possible way. And last but not least, all of you, our alumni and friends, have been there for us, making sure that our students were financially supported, which was extremely needed given that, the difficult circumstances, and providing our college with your continuing advice, the wisdom of your track record, your understanding of different perspectives. In particular, I want to thank our advisory board for their support every step of the way this last year. But that was last year. Moving forward, in the fall, we will be back in campus with all our programs. We know it will be a different normal we will be returning to, but we are sure it's going to be an even better normal. Our faculty are ready, our staff are ready, our students are so ready, and we know that you will be also ready with us. The LAS family is ready. And now, moving forward with our program this evening, it is my pleasure to return the mic to Emily. Thank you.
Goodness. Hi there. Thank you all so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maria Ferreira. Joy Maria Ferreira is an associate professor within Depaul University's Department of Social Work and co-director for the Center for Community Health Equity, a partnership between Depaul and Rush University to promote health equity. Having served for over 25 years as a licensed clinical social worker, her areas of research involve ethnic identity development among minority youth and health disparities within racial minority communities. She's the co-founding co-chair of the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health, a collaborative community-based and research-informed initiative that is a partnership between immigrants, regardless of status, mental health practitioners, community organizers, researchers, and allies. She's been a Public Voices Fellow with the Op-Ed Project and is a recent recipient of the Humanities X Collaborative Fellowship. So now I will turn it over to you, Dr. Ferreira.
Thank you, Emily. I'm just going to share my slides here. Let me know if you don't see them. So the Center for Community Health Equity is a partnership between Depaul and Rush University. It was established in 2015 with a vision to improve community health outcomes and contribute to the elimination of health inequities in Chicago. And since it's been established, the value has been true to engage community in research and query, scholarship, service, to not only outline problems and social determinants of health, but also working with communities to work towards solutions. The broader work of the center involves multiple areas of research, scholarship, practice, and dissemination. All of encompasses the four cores of the Center of Community Health Equity. If you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you more about the center at any time. This evening, I'll more specifically focus on the Healing Justice Dialogue series, which is an initiative that began just this past academic year, involves multiple departments within LAS, as well as community partners, in direct response to recent events that continues to touch and impact all of our communities. It was clear within Depaul and within our college, there were many amazing people and centers already doing healing justice work and scholarship and practice. So I want to acknowledge Anne Russo from the Women's Center, the directors, Susanna Martinez from Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies, Julie Moody-Freeman from the Center for Black Diaspora, as well as our community partner, the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health. They've all played a critical role, and collaboration has been the center of this initiative. When we came together, we were all feeling the weight of the moment, that we were in crisis, our country was in crisis. We were in the midst of a health and human rights crisis. We came together to discuss our position as a collective We knew we wanted to respond with the understanding that communities were experiencing multiple levels of violence, different types of violence, and we continue to hear those stories. We knew that more spaces for difficult conversations need to be had, and more spaces for healing need to be had. So this collective position has driven our programming for the Healing Justice Dialogue series. The aim of the series includes increasing our understanding and consciousness around structural racism and violence, raising our awareness about the historical and trauma and oppression communities experience and how this impacts individual and community wellness. We wanted to facilitate dialogue that helps us learn the resilience of diverse and Indigenous communities, highlighting non-traditional ways of healing, creating a community of healing and restorative justice. And we wanted dialogue to help us increase our awareness around community activism. We knew that we had a lot to learn, and we knew that it would be powerful to learn together. We were particularly drawn to the definition of healing justice by Kara Page, who's the architect of this concept, that each individual deserves to heal in their own terms, that trauma can be collective, historical, intergenerational, and the capacity to heal already exists within communities. And that healing is a form of resilience and resistance in which each individual and community is entitled, and that's critical to social movement. With our inaugural event in September last fall, we continue to plan events that create spaces where prominent individuals speak to us about their work in racial and healing justice. They've helped us create spaces where critical dialogue and difficult conversations could occur. These extraordinary speakers shared their work, their wisdom, they challenged our thinking, they called us to interrogate the structures and systems that continue to oppress and cause violence to communities and our role in those structures. They've called us to various forms of action, activism, accountability, and building community where we can. Over these events throughout the year, we've attracted close to 1,000 attendees to engage in dialogue with us, and we continue to engage diverse members of our communities. Our next event on May 14th centers the experiences of Asian American immigrants, inequities in schools and their impact on the mental health of children, elderly Asian immigrants amidst COVID. With the help of Depaul's Vincentian Endowment Fund and recent funding from the Chicago Community Trust, we're able to continue and develop future planning and continue the Healing Justice Dialogue series, offer education and training around restorative justice practice, facilitating support circles and spaces of support for various communities with the train the trainer model as well as the train the facilitator model. With that, I'm going to end there. Thank you for allowing me to share the work of the center and the collaborative work of the Healing Justice Dialogue series. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ferrera, both for presenting today and of course for all of the important work that you continue to do. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ewan Hague. Dr. Ewan Hague is a professor of geography, director of the School of Public Service, and director of the college's new urban collaboratory. His books include Regional and Local Economic Development and Neoliberal Chicago. Ewan's expertise in urban studies led him to pull together a multidisciplinary team to examine the geography of COVID-19 using ESIR's ArcGIS software platform, which has been used to teach cartography to students in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences for over 20 years. Ewan's team built a data dashboard that maps COVID cases, deaths, and most recently vaccines. So now I will turn it over to you, Dr. Hague.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I am posting the link in the chat so you can play around with our COVID data dashboard. So at the start of the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of questions, and so one of the things that we wanted to do as an interdisciplinary group of faculty within the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences was to bring our expertise together to better understand just what was happening. And so one of the things that we decided to do was to build out from our ESRI ArcGIS platform, which is a data mapping technology that, as Emily introduced, we've been teaching with great success in the college for over 20 years, and begin to use that platform to map and chart publicly available data. So you can see here, you have the map of cases on the right, and you can click on deaths, on vaccinations. We can see the total vaccinations here, and you can also click on the various places. Here's Chicago's deaths and 7-day average. You can see these peaks on certain times. So here's April last year. Here's the second peak around about December. We have Cook County, you have Illinois, you have the US as a whole. You can zoom in as well. Again, I encourage you to play with this, share the link. You can find out more information about all these data points. Now, the way we set this up was to pull from City of Chicago, Cook County, US data. And so every 24 hours it updates. And so we can see these 7-day trends over time. And you can pull in. We also developed what we call our hardship index based on underlying factors from the census. And this is taking a little while to load. Here we go. Just give it a second. So you can use this slider here to identify, this is the 58th week of the pandemic. So that would be about early March or April. And this is very much Dashboard 1.0. We're in the process of creating a second, more advanced version now that is a collaboration between the Department of Geography, the School of Public Service, and the Chadwick Institute of Metropolitan Development, that you can type in a zip code or a neighborhood name or an address and search for the information on COVID vaccination rates, on case rates, on infection rates, and unfortunately death rates. The other thing that Dashboard 2.0 is going to have is an ability to download the data, so people can download it and use it in their own studies and analyses. So we presented this dashboard to a number of organizations. Perhaps the most important is a group called the Public Health GIS, which is a network of map users in public health throughout the Chicago area that involves members from city offices, from city offices, county public health, city public health, and other institutions. We presented that at the University of Chicago in December, and a couple of things came from that initial presentation. One is that the health officials from Cook County 7th District, which is on the southwest side of the city, have asked us, we actually have a meeting with them this coming Thursday, but they've been using this dashboard ever since to provide information to their constituents in the 7th District. And we are now working with them on mapping vaccine distribution sites to try to provide them with information about the best location to locate vaccination sites within the 7th District. So we're working with Cook County's 7th District literally as we speak. Another organization we worked with was a group called One Health Englewood. And following our presentations, they reached out to us to find out more information and see how we could help them out in terms of reporting health issues and mapping health data and COVID data in Englewood. So we put together a series of infographics. This was done by a student in our Masters of Sustainable Urban Development program. And you can see if I can, let me move my screen. Here we go. You can see here we have total vaccinations, total infections, number of essential workers in the neighborhood, exposure to infections, severe hospitalization rates, total number of deaths, and so forth. And this data was based in January. We did this. We did this for a series of meetings for One Health Englewood in the January-February time period. So what we've been able to do with this project is work with public health students, public administration students, public policy students, sustainable urban development, geography students, a series of faculty members and staff to put together this dashboard and be able to sort of do customized graphics and information to help people at the grassroots level in the communities understand and present COVID information to their to their partners and to the people they're working with. And we've now been invited by the Illinois Municipal Policy Journal to provide a summary of this work for publication by the end of this year. So we're looking forward to maintaining, creating Dashboard 2.0, keeping everything updated, and then also presenting this information, although it's City of Chicago focused, presenting this to the Illinois Municipal Policy League, which obviously is drawing on a lot of information to see how vaccination rates and so forth are impacting their municipalities and their cities. So it's very much a very practical way to use the skills, talents of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences to make a real difference to the City of Chicago during this pandemic. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. But again, I posted the link in the chat, so please feel free to click on it. That's Dashboard 1.0, and hopefully we'll have 2.0 up and running and available to you soon.
Perfect. Dr. Hague, thank you so much for sharing. And for everyone joining us tonight, we will also include that link in our post-event email, so you'll have it somewhere more permanent that you can reference as well in the future. But now it is my pleasure to introduce one of our Depaul alumni this evening. Matthew Manning is a double D-Min, earning his BA in the History of Art and Architecture in 2013 and his Master's in Writing and Publishing in 2018. Matthew is a writer, brand consultant, and social entrepreneur with a deep passion for inclusion and equity. He's the co-founder of Gumbo Media and a freelance writer and graphic designer. So now, Matthew, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. Hello, all. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Hope everyone is happy and healthy, all things considered. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can see this just fine. Full screen mode. Perfect. All right. Oh, it says sharing is paused. One moment here. I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay. So as Emily mentioned, my name is Matthew Manning. I am a double D-Min. As was stated, I graduated just a few years ago, at least my master's. The undergrad a few years before then. And I am the co-founder of a program called Gumbo Media. So what is Gumbo Media? Gumbo Media is a boutique media company. We call ourselves boutique because we're a small, nimble team, about 15, 20 people or so. And what we say is that we expand the narrative of Black life. So it's really a vision of equity through storytelling in various avenues. And we're really trying to build a powerful ecosystem as well. So we don't talk enough about this, but Black buying power in the United States is about over $1 trillion right now, which is massive, massive influence on economies, on social culture, and things of that nature. And more than, I think, 98% or so, I think it's even more than that, is spent outside of our community and going back into places that don't often inform or include us in decision-making, in the actual ability to transform systems. So we're trying to change that a little bit. We're trying to ensure that whatever comes through our doors stays in our doors and circulates by amplifying creatives, such as those that graduate from the LA&S program, such as myself, to be the most successful they can be in whatever their creative and kind of passionate pursuits might be. And so from the curators such as ourselves to the creators such as yourselves to the consumers or the champions who may be other members of our community who are championing this content, continuing to pay it forward by helping to fund this content or invest in this content or seek services, all of that being something that's circulating within our community as much as possible. So in short, we're storytellers. We tell stories and we help other people tell theirs better as well. So Gumbo has kind of two basic components. There's Gumbo Media, through which we have two kind of angles of storytelling. We have the editorial pipeline. So we have our own print publication called Gumbo Magazine, which I'll speak to in a little bit. But it's really our stories told our way. We're also working on a lot of digital resources and zines right now. We are working on a few, like a timeline of the history of Bronzeville, which is going to be really cool and interactive. So we're kind of diving into both digital and print media by telling stories and amplifying different creatives in the process. We've published the work of close to over 400 people now, which is really exciting. And they've all been paid for their services. And then on the other side, we do services where we actually help other people tell their stories better. So everything from, kind of the local mom and pop shop to the new solo entrepreneur, all the way up through ecosystems as large as Nike or American Red Cross. We help Minneapolis Public Schools. We help people tell their stories through branding support in a myriad of different ways, whether that's brand consulting, website development, copywriting. We've written some scripts, things of that nature. And then on the entire kind of offshoot of Gumbo, which has nothing to do with media, is Gumbo Fit. We started a fitness initiative, which does have some media angles, but it's actually in partnership with Nike Running. And it was an effort and an opportunity to build that same level of representation within our community, but in a fitness space that had very much been lacking, specifically on the south and west sides of Chicago. So when COVID hit, there were two central questions that we were asking ourselves literally on a daily basis. How do we show up for our community during this historic time in the world? And what roles specifically do we play with the skill sets and the talents that we have? And 4 things came about, and I'll kind of run through those very quickly. Community, programming, content, and services. Those are the things that we realized we can create space for and open up space for folks to thrive within our community, even during this time through those spaces. So as an example, community. The very first question we had to ask was, how do we provide a space of healing for folks? The pandemic brought a lot of anxiety, but it's also important to remember that for the Black community and other minority communities across the country, which now collectively have the majority, that there was also, there were a lot of cases like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, obviously George Floyd, that were also causing other types of trauma and anxiety. And so there was this massive manifestation of mental health issues happening in our community. I had never seen so many people in my circles so sad, so in need of support and external support. So we did a few different things. We did programming where we opened up community spaces for healing. People sang, people performed poetry, people just spoke and shared what was on their mind. We also managed to lock in a partnership with Talkspace, which is an online mental health provider, and provide free mental health services for several people in our community, which is really exciting and felt really good to be able to provide that space. We also have, this is through Gumbo Fit, we have a running community called Gumbo Fit, and that community meets every Saturday and every Tuesday to do running exercises. We have a track program and a community run all on the south side of Chicago. And we have about 20 or so people show up every single day. We have those programming, which is exciting. We also started a race series called The Road Less Traveled. And we really cycle through a lot of South Side locations like Washington Park and places of that nature, and host COVID-safe running races. We have now done 6 of them. These are just some quick snapshots. We've repurposed metals out of wood and acrylic and all sorts of different things, anything we can do to replicate the experience of running in a race. For any runners out there, you know that Chicago is one of the major cities, one of the 5 major cities in the world, along with New York and LA and Germany and a few others. And all of the races were shut down, the marathon, the half marathon, things of that nature. And people needed to get outside, obviously, amidst all of this. And so we tried to fill that gap a bit. We were kind of the first, along with Edge Athlete Lounge on the north side, actually, in Lincoln Park near Depaul. And we partnered together to try to fill the space of getting outside and getting active and fit while setting a standard for how to do that safely. There was a period where we shut everything down just because rates were so high in Chicago. And we recently just completed our 6th race. So that's just a little bit about that community. Now, some of the programming, which you could also argue is community work, is one thing we noticed is people were transitioning into the digital space. Anybody who's on Instagram saw, anytime you clicked into Instagram, suddenly you were accidentally hitting into a live session and you were watching people's lives, because everybody was trying to migrate and find a way to bring their work, their physical work, into the digital community. Part of what we noticed was everybody that was entering that space had the resources, the tools, the audience kind of already built in to their natural kind of creative economy to make that successful. So we asked, okay, well, what about everybody else? And so what we did was we created a program for expression, education, and economy called Mello Network. And we did this fairly quickly. We got this up by April. Obviously, the pandemic hit in March. And so we were able to host dozens of different creatives who didn't have this time or the skills or sometimes just the capacity to build their own platform for digital presence. Instead, we gave them a space to host paid workshops internally on everything from, writing to yoga to wine tasting to business workshops, and they got paid for those workshops. They got 70% of all those proceeds. The rest went into further building the program. And it also allowed them an opportunity to test and pilot a lot of their ideas, that their physical expertise that they've been building their entire career in the digital space. And it's exciting to see many of these folks have continued to go on and do this, and to now even build up entire businesses around this platform. Content. We launched our own print publication. Coincidentally, some would say unfortunately, we launched it March 1st, 2020. Within obviously a couple of weeks, everything was shut down. And so we had an entire book tour set up for all of this. And we really had to start thinking about how do we pivot and get our book in the hands of people. It's a physical book. We put a lot of energy into it so that people could really see themselves reflected in it. But what we did was we started really distributing it in creative ways. We locked in partnerships with libraries. We sent it to a lot of equity groups who are now using it as syllabi in their curriculum. And it features 85 paid creatives, artists, photographers, writers, poets, all sorts of different artists for their work. And one thing we found and heard a lot is that it's very layered and it's very dense. And so as people are reading it, they found a lot of healing in it through the pandemic. And so this time was actually very right for people to be sitting down and sitting with content that was very carefully crafted for their enjoyment and for their full representation without any kind of bars held. We've done various video montages and different projects, such as this one, where this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. We gathered 35 different creatives. We built an original score, an original script, and we basically amplified about 35 Black photographers, which was amazing. You can see how amazing this work is. And we were telling the story of really a lot of the things that were on a lot of our hearts around the time, again, of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and folks of that nature. So this was another example of the work that we've been putting out there and allowing others and inviting others in to step in and offer their creative outlets as well. And then, of course, the services, and this will be kind of the last wing here. We have an active client portfolio, and one thing we've seen is actually a lot of people have been building their businesses at this time. So despite the pandemic hitting and there being kind of a downturn initially, we've actually seen a massive uptick in people reaching out for services, many of which are Black women-owned, Black-owned businesses. Even if they're not, they're reaching out to Black businesses because obviously the conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion have been so ripe during this last year. And so we've embraced all of that regardless of their identity and really started to push out amazing brands that you can go out. So these are just a couple of examples. This is one, if you're looking for a puzzle when you're bored on one of these days during COVID, feel free to purchase one of these puzzles. This is called Apostrophe Puzzles. It's a Black woman-owned brand. And a lot of the proceeds go back to community orgs that are supporting the creative outlets for young students and young people in the world who hopefully would be in a program like LANS someday. And sorry about the blurriness here. That should have been a little crisper, but this is another brand called House of Gristle. This is a Black woman-owned restaurant and catering service. They serve a lot of kind of professional athletes as well as just everyday community members in the Minneapolis area, which obviously has been very hard hit during this time. So they've done a lot of amazing work. And we were really fortunate to build their brand prior to the pandemic and to see it grow during the pandemic, despite everything else happening, them really stepping up and offering a lot of support to their community. So that's what we do. We provide community and content opportunity to support the folks in our community and hopefully to see their support continue to extend on to others and build as much of that circular ecosystem as we can. So I believe that's it. Thank you so much. I will pass it back to Emily and hope to engage with y'all in a little bit.
Great. Well, thank you again, Matthew, for, again, all of the amazing work that you're doing in the community, and also for taking the time to join us this evening. And now I am excited to introduce our last presenter for this evening, Madeline Fox, who is a current Depaul student. Madeline Fox is a freshman majoring in philosophy with a possible double major in criminology and a field of interest in criminal law. She is a member of the Housing Marketing Edge team, a career readiness program at Depaul. Her personal interests include ice skating, watching crime documentaries, and volunteering at Cuddle Bunny. So Maddie, I will let you take it from here.
Thanks so much for that. Let me share my screen really quickly. Move this out of the way. So I was part of the Depaul documentary corps this year, and we specialize in engaging in and preserving the moment. So ISP 392, or the Depaul Documentary Corps, is a part of Depaul's Humanities X initiative worth 4 credits, and it doubles as both a class and an internship. Undergrad students such as myself worked with Depaul's special collections and archives to learn about, conduct, process, and edit remote interviews with Depaul students, staff, alumni, and community partners. These interviews focus on topics such as the struggle for racial justice and the COVID-19 pandemic. During the learning process, we read and watched materials on oral history and its subsequent ethics codes, took the City Basic Human Subjects training course, and listened to speakers who are currently involved in the field of oral history. So for my interviews, before I could start getting things ready for them, I had to actually pick who I was interviewing. So for my first interview, I chose Peter Golajewski. He lives in the same dorm as me, and he's a current Depaul student. And I chose him because he has the unique freshman experience of moving and living on campus during the pandemic, and he had an in-person class at the time of the interview, which was pretty rare. And for my second interview, you probably remember him from earlier, but I chose Professor Ewan Hague. He was one of my fall quarter instructors, and I chose him because he had the unique experience of teaching during the pandemic, and he has relevant knowledge to discuss a lot of the issues going on right now, such as COVID. And then after picking my interviewees, I was able to use my previous knowledge of them, combined with a bit of research to create my narrator-specific questions. After I combined my narrator or interviewee-specific questions with my general questions, I had my interview guides. The interviews I conducted were roughly 45 to 50 minutes. I started them by reading a little script detailing what was expected of them, then started filming. After I filmed my interviews, or really recorded them on Zoom, I created transcripts and formulated metadata, which I'll get into in a little bit. I also, as I mentioned, filmed them on Zoom, which is nice because I got to learn more of the mechanics of Zoom, which is really relevant right now. So we preserved them on OHMS, which is also called the Oral History Metadata Synchronizer. And so OHMS is a web-based tool that allows your interviews to be in an easy to navigate online format rather than just in the form of a transcript. And so you'll see here, these are the interviews, and then we have an index. And so an index shows topics discussed in an interview along with where in the interview they take place. So if you look closely, you can see like the topic names and the timestamp for it. And when you click on one of the sections of the index, it pulls up with this little thing, which has like the segment of the interview that it takes place in, partial transcript, a synopsis, and keywords to help you identify where it is. And so we learned about this work, as I mentioned earlier, through speakers. So we talked to these speakers to both learn about what we were doing in class and to also learn about what we could do with our knowledge when the class was over. We spoke to Britton Anenga, who's a university archivist at Depaul Special Collections and Archives. We spoke to Peter Alter, who's the director of the Studs Terkel Center for Oral History at the Chicago History Museum. We spoke to Vishon Jordan Jr., who is an independent photographer, and he recently created a book on the 2020 protests called The Chicago Protest, a Joyful Revolution. And we also talked to Yasmin Zechariah Mikhael, who is a Depaul alum and a creative consultant in oral history, dramaturgy, and writing. So we shared the work of the corps through our digital projects. There were 3 digital projects, and our class was split into groups to complete them. The first project was wireframing a website to promote the work of the Depaul Documentary Corps. And a wireframe is a set of images used to create a mock-up for a possible web page. There was also an audio editing team who created highlight stories from the interviews. And a highlight story is a short collection of clips from a singular interview, oftentimes edited together to sound like one continuous story that the interviewee is telling. And then the last project was to create a finding aid, which helps researchers find the interviews in the future. And a finding aid is a document that describes what materials are included in an archival collection. That helps to organize the materials and their metadata and indexing information like we saw in OHMS. So I worked in a group with 2 other people, and we chose to make the finding aid for our collection. We worked with Depaul Archives member Britton Anenga, who you probably remember from the previous slide. Our group put together a brief so that we could describe the history of the collection, the demographics of the people included in the collection, and what demographic holes would need to be filled by the Corps in future interviews. And so as you can see, this is our finding aid. We had a title page, and the brief was separate, but we also had a collection description with, again, the history behind it, which is also like the story behind it, an abstract describing what was in it, the scope and arrangement, which describe how it'll be organized. We also had possible restrictions, which there weren't any, and the language was in English, and possible related materials in Depaul's archives. And then you can see here the first collection of interviews, which has like another scope section or general description of them and how they're going to be arranged. And more of these mini collection pages will be added in the future as the Corps continues to go on. And so this is the website that came from the wireframe. So yeah, it's an actual website now. And on the website, we feature some of the highlight stories, which are 2 to 3 minutes. And you can visit the website at documentarycorps.org, but you can see that there's like an interviews pages where you can listen to the full-length interviews. There's a get involved section if you want to get involved with the Corps. There's an about section. If you click the little homepage button, then it'll take you to some of the highlight stories. And then some of my takeaways were that I have a better understanding on what goes into creating archival materials and oral histories, which helps me understand what went into previous collections and why the preservation is so important. I also learned about important professions from our class's speakers, which I never would have known about otherwise. And I also learned that oral history really allows people to engage with and reflect on history as it's happening.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maddie. And again, I'll just reiterate that all of the links and any resources that we mentioned today will also be sure to include in our post-event email that you can expect to receive tomorrow. To kick things off with Q&A, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. But our first question tonight is going to go to Dr. Ferrera. That question is, how would you advise others who might like to organize restorative justice programming or different initiatives in their local communities or their workplace? What steps would you advise that they take?
Yeah, if they want to contact me, I'd be happy to talk to them. We've just been learning over the last few months that there's many community organizations here in Chicago that is doing this work, amazing people who have been doing restorative justice practice for a long time. And I can connect with you if you're interested. We can have a conversation around who these folks are. And there's different ways of practicing depending on who the audience is, who the community is. So I'd love to have a conversation with you if you'd like.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And our next question is going to go to Dr. Hague. Your team, it sounds like, did some amazing work with the COVID dashboard. What were some of the things that surprised you and the rest of your team as you began working on that project?
I think what surprised us most as we began on the project, because obviously the data was in the news a lot and so forth. But I think what really, I don't know if it really surprised us, but the importance of knowing, I mean, if you look at the COVID data this year, the importance of using geographic information systems and mapping technology to know where clusters are. And I think one of the things that really jumped out at us was a sort of the importance that public health and administrations put on this type of technology to better understand how and where COVID was spreading. And so I think the other thing actually that surprised us was just the last couple of weeks to compare there's actually a relatively recent surge in COVID, that in February there was actually relatively few cases in Chicago, and the map was kind of a bluish, a bluish color, light blue, light orange, which means not very many cases. And then by the early March, it was bright red again. So sort of seeing these variations, just when you think we're getting on top of things, there's these new spikes in COVID. I think the other thing that surprised us, it wasn't really a surprise, but we basically maxed out. The reason we're going on to Dashboard 2.0 was we maxed out the functionality of what I showed you. And so one of the things we're building now is in a more advanced geographic information systems that's going to involve searchability and so forth. Because as we presented the information, again, it wasn't really a surprise, but it was a challenge to it was a challenge to make it even more interactive and usable for the public. And so we kind of reached the limitations of the software and are now able to go beyond those in our next iteration, which hopefully will be available by the end of May or early June.
Great, thank you so much. The next question we have is going to be for our alumnus, Matthew. How have you found that your understanding or your approach to storytelling has changed both in your life since you were a student at Depaul and then getting into working at Gumbo, but also specifically within the past year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's easy as a storyteller, whether you're a writer or an artist, you're often told that like your art needs to be universal. And I think there are universal themes that touch people, that stir people's souls and hearts. And I think those are good things to speak to and create around. But part of what I find is if you try to speak for everybody, you end up kind of speaking to nobody. I think it helps to speak from experience. I think it helps to speak to your experience and to what you know best and to, frankly, what makes you tick, as opposed to trying to just create stories that are kind of just merely meant to be global and capture as many people's minds and hearts as possible. At least I found that that's what naturally makes things more compelling. And the quote that has really anchored that for me, especially this last year, but really since our inception and in my own personal storytelling journey as a writer, is somebody on Twitter said, I don't remember their name, but probably a decade ago, you don't have to speak for everybody, just pass the mic. And I love that. It's the thought of, you don't have to be the voice for, unheard people. They're just unheard. It's not that they don't have a voice. They just haven't had the opportunity. I'm using voice metaphorically here, obviously, but that they just haven't had the opportunity to express their story, to share their story. So it's more for us about creating the ecosystems, and even for myself personally, creating the ecosystems that allow people to plug in and share their stories authentically, as opposed to contriving or over curating what that story should look like.
Thank you. I just love that. The concept of passing the mic is so impactful and so important, and certainly something I think we can all really think about. Our next question, we are going to go back to Maddie Falk. Maddie, can you maybe talk a little bit about how you imagine the interviews that you and your fellow students did being used in the future, and kind of if you're thinking 10 years or 20 years from now, how do you think people will look back at this project and the stories that you shared?
So for ours, one of the main concepts that I learned in class is that a lot of history isn't really documented. It's kind of just assumed that it will be documented. So it kind of gets forgotten. And so I'm really hoping that these interviews will just provide a little bit of context into people's everyday lives, their thoughts and their feelings about everything going on for future generations.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I think for our last question this evening, unless anybody else wants to sneak one in the Q&A here in the next minute, Matthew, we're going to go back to you. And could you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the lessons you learned about community building through the Gumbo Fit initiative that you launched with the running group, and any takeaways that you saw there, or advice that you would give to someone else that's looking to build community and create a greater sense of community where they are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think an important facet of community building is really honoring the gaps that exist, and honoring also the gaps that have already been filled, and really thinking about like, what is the community's need? I think we have to start disassociating a little bit better what our interests are with what the community need actually is, at least when we're trying to engage with community, because sometimes those things don't necessarily sync up. We can have a lot of great intentions, but that intention doesn't necessarily translate to an active and realistic need within the community. And so I think just being honest about those things and recognizing that there are people who are doing certain things really, really well, and then there are certain gaps that feel like they exist that we feel uniquely positioned based on our skill set to fill. So part of what we realized, for example, is my co-founder, who happens to be my partner, her name is Courtney. Courtney and I, when we started Gumbo Fit, it was a community that we felt was necessary, and we were like, are we the right people to fill this? Because we're not runners, for example, but what we were community builders. We were empaths. We loved connecting with people. We loved telling stories, and we were thinking about how can story be a unique way, especially through a space that hasn't had a lot of representation. How can storytelling be a unique space and platform for engaging with folks and building community spaces that people can really connect to? And what we found is that people consistently come through and run with us and engage with us. And regardless of where they are on their running journey, regardless of how fast or slow they run, they continue to come back because they say, I feel supported here, I feel seen here, I feel heard here. And so it's less about the activity, and it's more about using the activity as a tool and as a vessel and vehicle for really driving community connection and interaction. And so for us, it was really that initial meditation on like, what really is needed here, and how can we uniquely bring our skill sets to the table? And our skill set was storytelling. And what we found was that it framed a pretty unique community that's still continuing to grow despite kind of all the forces out there. And obviously we're heeding those all very carefully and very seriously, but I think that speaks a lot to, people's genuine interest in communities where they feel like they can authentically bring themselves to the table.
Yeah, those are certainly some important and really helpful lessons for all of us these days. Well, since we don't have any further questions, I now have the honor of turning it back over to Dean Guillermo Vásquez de Velasco to provide some closing remarks for us this evening.
Thank you, Emily. And in closing, I want to thank Maria, Ewan, Matthew, and Maddie for your presentations. You have provided us with wonderful examples of our resilience and how we continue to answer to the Vincentia call to do what needs to be done. Also, a big thank you to our Office of Alumni Engagement and to our Dean's Office. We know that it takes a lot to make you all appear in our screens. Finally, a huge thank you to all our alumni and friends for your continuing support. We cannot do what we do without you. So a huge thank you to all of you out there. And as I always say at the end of our events, may the liberal arts be always with you. Thank you.